We are live. Hi, everyone.
Can you also,
Hello.
can you allow me to mute at times or not?
I will work on that. That's a weird thing. You should be in control of that. But I can make you a co-host. That'll definitely give you powers. Oh, it's scary.
Not just if the dog starts barking like he was a minute ago.
If you're co-host, you should be in charge of yourself. So hopefully I will lose that power.
Still won't let me mute, so.
You can mute yourself. Everybody else can mute themselves.
It's hard enough just in natural life, but on the machine it's not working either.
Okay, I don't know what to tell you.
Maybe I can do it on my phone.
All right.
So I'm going to call us to order and you two can work on Zoom tech issues. All right. So welcome everybody to the October 2020 CRB meeting. Thanks for coming. We're going to start just with the agenda and materials review. And I see one amendment that I should have made beforehand. If I'm understanding correctly, we don't have the minutes for the last meeting, so we don't need to slot time. So I would suggest that we just remove that 5 minutes from the agenda. But other than that, keep the agenda intact. Is everybody okay with the agenda with that amendment of removing the discussion for minutes approval? All right. Anybody opposed to it or concerned or want to change something else about the agenda?
I am not at all opposed, but I do want to say that the minutes will be forthcoming, and also commendations were not out yet when I put together the packet. So, sorry.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so let's forge ahead. We have come to public comment. So I'm looking to see. So if anybody would like to make public comment, if you are on Zoom via computer, please raise your hand on Zoom, your little blue hand, and we will call on you. You'll have 3 minutes to make public comment, and Leah will give you a little signal 30 seconds before your time is up. So I'll give everyone a minute to find their little hand raise. Leah, can you help me? If someone is calling in via phone, I don't see anybody calling in via phone, but if they are, how do they indicate that they would like to speak?
If they were on the phone, they could do, I believe it's *8. I actually do not.
Thank you.
And it would show me. But there are ways, just to ease everyone's concerns. There are definitely, there are.
Yeah, I don't see anyone calling in via phone, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear that if people are, they can make public comment. Okay. So I don't see anybody raising their hand. So I'm going to assume that there is no public comment this evening. And we will move on to board member comments. Would anybody like to volunteer to go first? I see Bernadette, go ahead.
I know that Leah said that Michael was not going to be here, but I didn't know if it was stated while we had people in attendance. So we know he's not going to be here.
Correct. Yeah.
Otherwise, I have nothing to add.
Carolyn, would you mind going next, and then Rick?
I don't think I have any comments this month specifically.
Nor do I.
Thank you. Jose?
No comment.
Okay, this is so easy. Oh, Rick, can I pick on you? Can I ask you to talk a little bit about the ad hoc committee meeting? I'll talk a little bit about the police commission meeting, and that'll make it a little easier for my brain. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Thank you.
The ad hoc meeting was last week. There were 30 or so panel members, parts of the people on the commission, and a number of, probably an equal number or close to that, participating from the public. The focus of the meeting was on civilian oversight, and there was a presentation done by Leah, and Mark participated. And then Lindsay and I had an opportunity to discuss issues about how we felt the board was operating and explain a little bit about how the board operated and what we did and what we didn't do. There were a number of questions, and there were times when it got a bit kind of kind of clunky, as Kevin Altucker said, because of some technical issues. But other than that, it went pretty smoothly. Everybody seems to be tracking fairly well, and we're going to go on to another subject next week.
Thank you, Rick. Yes, so Rick and I were both at that meeting, and we were discussing civilian oversight, as he said. I thought the presentations from staff were really helpful to have EPD staff and the auditor staff there to kind of help get us all kind of to some common level of understanding about the processes that we currently have in place. I think that's a really good place to start from. So thank you, staff. The police commission meeting was last week. Typically, they happen directly after our CRB meeting, but because of the way the dates fell, it was... Leah, you look confused. Am I saying something odd? Oh, okay, just making sure. Maybe it wasn't last week. I don't know. What day is it? Okay, sorry.
Not a response to you. I apologize.
Okay. So police commission was last week, and the main things that were discussed at the table, the commission looked at the pepper ball policy. This was a policy that was looked at earlier in the year by police commission, and then was brought back to the table to look at again, I think probably in response to the protests in the early summer. We obviously haven't reviewed that that series of community impact cases yet, so it may be possible that we'll ask to bring that policy back again. I don't know, but we did discuss the policy, and the board voted not unanimously to approve it with some changes that have been requested. So there have been some modifications to the pepper ball policy that have now been enacted, I believe. Senator Manning also came and gave a presentation to discuss sort of state level things that he's advocating for in relation to police. And yeah, I think those are the main items from that meeting. And that's all I have to say. So the next item that's on our agenda is a little awkward, seeing as how we don't have the whole body here. So, but I don't know that it's terribly avoidable. Leah, did Bill indicate when he thought he might be able to make it?
He said he was hoping to make it later in the meeting, so it's possible if we table this to like after case review or after break that we would have at least 6 members. Michael won't be making it at all though.
Right. So I think we are sort of required to make elections for chair and vice chair by the October meeting. So we have to do it tonight. If everyone is okay with it, is it okay if we move elections to after the case review just to maybe give Bill a chance? Is everyone okay with that? Okay, so I'm just going to make a nice, really official looking arrow, move that down the agenda. Okay, thank you.
Jose, did you give thumbs up? Are you okay moving that on the agenda? Okay, great.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll do the elections after we discuss the cases. Thank you. So case review. So Leah, I will turn it over to you. As we had discussed in our August meeting, each month we are trying to review 2 cases. So we have 2 cases to review this month. And so Leah, if you can walk us through, and then I'll walk us through you can walk us through the descriptions, and then I'll walk us through the rest of the discussion.
Sure. These are Mark's cases. So he is going to be doing it, but I am doing the PowerPoint. So we have a team presentation this evening.
Thank you.
So I will now share my screen, which is always has that little scary, awkward moment. So bear with me. Make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Okay, can you all see that? Yeah, okay, good stuff. Just find slideshow, play slideshow. All right, Mark, you're up.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, sorry. All kinds of technical difficulties here. The iPad doesn't want to allow me to touch the screen, so what we had in this case, we had officers B and C responding to a community member report of a disorderly person at or near an intersection. I know if people are just in audio that that's why we'll just read the summary of facts. The call details indicated that the suspect had slapped the complainant in the head and was attempting to steal the complainant's property. The complainant stated they wanted the suspect prosecuted. Both officers arrived about the same time. On Officer C's ICV, the suspect can be seen pushing the complainant. ICV standing for in-car video. Officer B contacted the suspect, who appeared to match the description as provided by the 911 caller. Officer B made initial contact with the suspect and told the suspect to sit down on a nearby bench. As viewed on body-worn camera, the suspect failed to immediately comply, stating that they had a broken spine and that's why they changed their pants. The suspect also stated that they had done nothing. The officers ordered the suspect to stop resisting, that they were being detained, and if they could not listen, would be placed in handcuffs. The suspect was never told they were under arrest. And I use they in that context as a singular pronoun. On video, it appeared that by now Officer C is holding the suspect's hand behind their back in a handcuffing position, while Officer B applies pressure to the suspect's right arm, bending it behind their back and up towards the suspect's head. The suspect verbally objected, stating, "Ow, you're breaking my damn arm." The suspect's arm appeared to be in an unnatural position with their hand near the back of their shoulder. As Officer B attempted to force the suspect to the ground, Officer B heard a loud pop, and the suspect's upper arm appeared to break. The suspect yelled, "Ow, God, you broke my arm. Oh, my God." Officer B and C places the suspect in a prone position on the ground. Officer B continued to tell him to stop resisting as Officer B applied handcuffs. The suspect stated, "My bone's sticking out." Officer B asked another officer to call for Code 3 medics, which arrived soon thereafter. Sometime after the event, the defensive tactics supervisor was asked to review the incident and provide findings. The defensive tactics supervisor determined that the officers, and in particular Officer B, did not attempt to de-escalate the situation. Instead, the defensive tactics supervisor determined that Officer B sped up the situation and that the arm takedown by Officer B was not consistent with department training techniques. However, the defensive tactics supervisor stated that after contact, the suspect tried to pull away, thus the force applied was within policy. So the allegation was that Officer B's use of force during the arrest of the suspect was in violation of the use of force policy. In terms of adjudication, the EPD chain of command recommendation, Sergeant, Lieutenant, and Captain were all within policy. I think Deputy Chief too. I'm not positive about that. I'd have to look at the notes. Our recommendation, our office's recommendation was sustained, and the Chief of Police sustained the allegations.
Thank you, Mark.
Where's my picture? Oh, that's right. She took it. She took me away.
So, I'm going to change my view so make this a little easier for me. Okay. So, in keeping with the way that we've done this the last couple of months, I'll ask everybody for just your general comments about the case, and then we will go through our checklist to make sure we discuss all the things that we need to sort of adhere to the spirit of the ordinance. So, Bernadette, since you volunteered to go first during opening comments, can I pick on you first, and then after Bernadette, Jose, please?
Absolutely. So I'm probably going to say what Rick would normally say, which is a broken arm in and of itself won't mean it's a policy violation. So that was kind of my first thought going into it. It's like, okay, still have to look at everything and see what was going on. But reading it before looking at the videos, it was one of those kind of yikes moments, that how quickly everything took place. And then I watched the video and saw that, yeah, it really took place as fast as it read in the book, and then listened to the audio interview of the officer. And the question, I think, was about attempts to de-escalate and asking and then demanding someone to sit down after they've said they have back issues. I wouldn't say there was any de-escalation that went on there. And if someone thinks repeating the same thing in a sterner voice is an attempt to de-escalate, I think we need to kind of be talking about a little bit more about what actual de-escalation would look like in a situation like this, especially when there's more than one officer on scene. I think, you know, some of the arguments that can be made about, you know, the need for safety kind of start to go out the window when there's only one officer there, and when there's multiple officers there. But when someone's alone, obviously, you know, safety is viewed a different perspective. So I just, it seemed pretty clear to me from the beginning that there were some mental health issues going on here. I know the officer was talking about drugs or alcohol, wasn't real clear about whether those were involved. And, you know, when you're there, obviously the officer can see and smell things that even in a video we won't be able to see and smell, and how the eyes are dilated and things like that. So I'm not negating that, you know, there may have very well been some other issues going on. But the vacillation between, you know, the victim, the complainant's tracking, I'm using complainant with regards to the person who was taken into custody, even though I don't think that was the actual complainant. But the way the complainant was able to track many of the things that were going on, I mean, able to respond that, you know, they couldn't sit because they had a broken back or back issues. And then was actually vacillated between being pretty polite and, no, I can't do that. Yes, I can do that. And then getting pretty agitated. So it was, yeah, there was a lot in that very short period of time that could have, I think, been different had that short period of time been stretched out to a longer period of time. So, overall thoughts.
Thanks, Bernadette. Jose, and then Carolyn.
Yeah, so can everybody hear me okay? In this case, I think it's pretty clear and easy to see that the use of force is not commensurate with the totality of the circumstances. Yeah, this is a person who was, does not, I think it'd be easy for us all to agree that this person does not appear to be a threat to anybody in uniform. And I think the case, for me, it's easier to make a decision when we see that this takedown was not consistent with department training techniques. And I think that's just, in any case, it's easier for me to, you know, start thinking down that path than, you know, like attempts to slow down the situation. Sometimes the situation is going to call for officers to act really fast. As Rick was helping me and other folks understand last week, that there are sometimes circumstances that could be happening at a much slower pace. And, you know, I remember Rick saying, well, we don't know if this person has a gun when they, you know, on them. This is not one of those cases. And so, yeah, I think this one's just really pretty clear. given that it appears to me also that this person is experiencing some kind of mental or cognitive problems. Yeah.
Thank you. Carolyn and then Rick.
I just echo what both Jose and Bernadette have said. I think that I agree that the officer didn't follow trainings, as the defensive tactics supervisor explained. Also with the de-escalation training, and also with the holds, how they used a different hold than they're trained on an EPD, and they said that they used a less effective hold. I mean, it's less effective, and it also apparently causes harm. So I think, why wouldn't you use the hold that you're trained in? I think that the thing that really stood out to me, I think Bernadette was saying this too, was the 20 seconds from first contact. 20 seconds with the first contact, and then all of a sudden this person is in a hold and under arrest without being told they're under arrest and have a broken arm. So yeah, I'm just echoing what they said. Yeah, the rest I can say later. So I'm done for this.
Thank you. Rick?
Thank you. I have to agree with what Bernadette said. That's exactly what I was thinking at the time, actually, was that the fact of the broken arm is not evidence of excessive force, in my view. It is merely a circumstance that took place probably, or not probably, I can't say that, potentially as a result of demineralization of bone, that type of thing. And it's what normally would have been an act that to another individual may not have broken the arm. It did bring into focus, however, the fact that the force was such that it needed us to look at it. And it maybe points out the reason for Lindsay's usual comment, which is we need to de-escalate. And this is clearly a case, as Jose said, that there was no evidence of a weapon. There was no exigent circumstance to the officers. There was no danger to them, no danger to the public. And it should have been an effort to do more to slow things down, see if they could use some other way other than a rather quick and violent grab of the arms and thrust upward with the right arm. I wasn't sure whether the lower arm or the upper arm was fractured, but it really doesn't matter. It seems to me that we don't know what the result had been if they had taken a little bit more time, but it's conceivable that this would have been prevented. So my finding was that probably the amount of force was reasonable, but we needed to do some things before we started using force in the first place.
Thanks, Rick. You know me, me and my de-escalation. So yeah, we'll talk about that later. But my comments were mostly echo what everyone has already said. So the speed was something that was really pretty shocking. So I did the same thing that Carolyn did, and I marked the time from when Officer B opened their door until the moment where it seemed like the arm snapped, and that was 20 seconds. So it was 15 seconds to 2 officers with hands on from when the moment the Officer B opened the door. So it was, I mean, open the door and like almost immediately engage. And so I was trying to think, like I was watching the video, that portion of the video like a few times, and trying to think like what was going on. Like, is there some kind of risk here that I'm just not perceiving? So I thought, okay, well, maybe the concern was that the person might run into traffic or fall into traffic, but the officers had blocked traffic. Maybe the concern was the safety of other civilians around this person, but there weren't any other civilians like within arm's reach, with any reasonable reach of this person. the person's hands were visible for most of the time, right? So grabbing for weapons and stuff didn't really seem to like pencil. So I really was trying to be fair and think like, what was it about this circumstance that made from opening door to breaking arm a 20-second interval? And I just really couldn't come up with anything. That's essentially was my thought process. I think because Officer B signaled to Officer A they were going hands-on, Officer A did the thing that they were supposed to do when another officer indicates they're going to go hands-on and assisted. So, you know, I don't, I guess, lay quite as much blame there, but still, it's a very upsetting video to watch. I would concur with what other people are saying, that it's pretty clear that the suspect, complainant, I don't know how we should address that person, but suspect was having difficulty mentally for whatever reason, and sometimes was talking to people who were present and sometimes was talking to people who were not present. And yeah, it was upsetting to watch. I cried. It seemed like, I suppose for me, in addition to like, you know, was this, you know, violation of use of force? Was this violation of de-escalation? It just reminds me that we failed sort of collectively as a society to take care of this person for a very long time. And then it sort of ends in this moment with me seeing this happening, and it makes me sad. And I hope that we find better ways to take care of people who need more care. That's not a police issue, so I digress. The next portion, if we can go through the complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring, that would be great. If it's okay with you, if we keep the same pattern, it's easier for me to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk. So Bernadette, if you want to kick us off, and then Jose.
Sure. So Jose made a comment about size, and in the officer's interview, there was a comment that the victim complainant was surprisingly strong for their slight stature. And then later on, I mean, well, I think I might send a note to Leah before I make my next comment. The other thing the officer has to always recognize, when Rick was making a comment about possible bone deterioration or things like that, that yeah, people that that the officers are contacting, especially homeless, you know, are often medically fragile, and the officers take them as they find them, and so, you know, they just have to be a little more careful. I think one concern I had in the complaint, the monitoring or the investigation, there was a comment on page 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, about the 6th paragraph, that the officer cordially requested the complainant to sit down. And I was interested. I circled that word, and then when I watched the video, I would not have characterized even the first request to sit down as the least bit cordial. Certainly the demanded the complainant to sit down. I'll agree with the demanded, but words like that, I think usually our investigators are, you know, pretty good about making sure that words like that are not in there, because they're not, I think, helpful for just the facts. So maybe it's just a little biased thing, but the word cordially just kind of stuck in my craw. Otherwise, I think I assume this came through Blue Team, and I appreciated the speed at which this happened. I mean, that it was 5 months from the date it happened to the date it's resolved in before us, I think is a testament to the hard work of IA and the auditor's office. So thank you.
Bernadette, what page was that on again? I want to see.
It was on the sergeant's memorandum. Oh, I'm sorry. It was on the sergeant's memorandum. It was not in the investigators. My bad.
Okay, thank
So-
you.
It was the sergeant's characterization that it was cordial. And so I take that back about the investigator. My bad.
And
Okay,
if I remember, she didn't complain. We opened it after, of course, you read about a broken arm, and this is the second one I think I've had in 30 years of experience. So it would be highly unusual to break someone's arm unless you used the wrong technique. And so we were the ones that opened the case.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Jose and then Carolyn.
I guess I want to come back to what Rick had said earlier, and again, I remain committed to learning and being caught up to speed on how to assess these kinds of things. So I appreciate, I had a change. I had one of those instantaneous changes of mind that don't come very often, but that I appreciate the fact that the broken arm is the consequence of the action, and at the same time does not indicate, will not always indicate an excessive use of force. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there and say, yeah, I appreciate learning that. Another thing that I wanted to come back to was page 7 of 19 reads, in his supplemental report, Officer A wrote, I responded to cover Officer B at 11th Avenue with a disorderly subject. Call details were as follows: yelling, going crazy, slap collar in the head randomly. I mean, there's not that much information there. And whether or not those, I don't know how that was necessarily communicated. But I'm imagining that if an officer sees that and then arrives at a situation, yeah, like when you read yelling, going crazy, you have no idea what you could find necessarily. But yet then again, I think this is all confirmed, and I'm equally persuaded by the finding that it only took 20 seconds from the opening of the door to, it looks to me like the bone broke up here.
It was near the elbow.
Oh, so closer down here?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm struck by what Lindsay said, that this is in terms of a wider, more general way to think about this case, it provides access into the way that people like this, that this is one of just many cases in which we can say that this is a horrifying example of folks who have slipped through the cracks of civic society, and its responsibility that we all take or assume. Not one here that this is beyond the scope of our discussion, but I just want to underscore that point. And when the time comes, I will throw in this comment that I like sports. I think sports help me think through other things, but muscle memory is the result of habits, right? That professional athletes train to the point where their bodies, they're not thinking consciously, their bodies are just reacting to situations, right? They're running full speed, put their arm up like this, and can do, things that I could never think of doing. If that's the case, I therefore believe that it's possible to develop de-escalation as a habit if we were to make it a habit. So this is one of those situations that could help us think through something like that, okay, what are the things we need officers to habitually repeat and practice in order to that de-escalation becomes a reaction rather than something that you have to think about.
Thank you, Carolyn, and then Rick.
Jose, I really like that analogy, and I take it even further and say that we don't want officers to be gaining muscle memory in bad habits also, right? And it seems like if they have this bad hold that caused a broken arm, then they often have probably used it before. That's conjecture, but it fits, right? The question I have in terms of intake and monitoring and all that, this clearly is a problem with de-escalation. So I'm curious why that was not one of the allegations that was discovered, that was investigated here. And Mark, I don't know if you have insight into that. And I know you don't like to pile on allegations, but it almost seems as, I mean, it seems equally as important here, if not even a little bit more so to me.
Well, it's within the policy, and I think it's that other point that you make about piling on. I've railed for years for people being arrested for the trifecta of interfering and resisting arrest and either disorderly conduct or assault on a police officer. I thought this wrapped around the whole use of force policy. I will say I thought that to break someone's arm, the force used was significantly disproportionate to what was necessary. And given the alleged crime at that point, the standards of Graham v. Connor. But it was wrapped in there. And I think putting 2 charges on it, again, in my judgment, would be contrary to the things that I've railed about them piling charges on people when they arrest people. And so, again, I think the far more significant allegation was the use of force policy. And we talked about the de-escalation. Did we pull it out as a separate allegation? No, we did not.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, that makes sense with this case, but I do think that we keep seeing de-escalation being a problem with EPD. So I wonder if making it more in the front of these investigations would help officers understand that it is something that they need to work on. So that's my thought.
Thanks, Carolyn. Rick?
Thank you. I think the investigation was good. Let me get that out of the way, because I think that it was a well-done investigation. I also question the issue about whether it should have been just reliant on the de-escalation as opposed to excessive force. Mark makes a good point that he was concerned that because of the history he has, that broken arms just don't occur in that situation. On the other hand, fracture does not equal excessive force. And what we have is a fracture, there's no question about it. But I don't think that the result is what was necessarily what we should be looking at. Anyway, be that as it may, I think that the charge of being outside the policy because of the excessive force is subsumed into that. The escalation is subsumed into that. And so it might be subject to a motion to make more definite and certain or something like that, or a demurrer. But it strikes me that it's the appropriate charge eventually, and that was okay with me. I do think it's important for me to note, though, that I do not believe that the existence of the fracture is conclusive of the issue of excessive force. It's some evidence of it, but not conclusive.
And if I didn't clarify enough, maybe in my memo, it was part and parcel with the improper use of the technique, and whether the person, and so if the officer had used proper technique and not yanked her arm up like that, then it might have just been a de-escalation thing. But because the technique was significantly flawed, that's where then I got to the effect.
I understand. And I had a question about that also, because I looked at when I Googled the San Cajo or Cajo, whatever it is supposed to be the maneuver that they're supposed to do. And I can't tell you whether there would have been a different result. And I don't think anybody can tell there'd be a different result, given this lady's physical makeup. It could have ended up in the same result. On the other hand, if you teach them a trained technique, you should use the trained technique. There must be a reason for it. Probably because it brings people to submission earlier. That's all. Thank you.
So I had the same concern about de-escalation not being considered separately. I will note that EIA investigators noted de-escalation as kind of a potential issue. The defensive tactics sergeant really highlighted de-escalation, like the performance regarding de-escalation to be unsatisfactory. I guess what I wonder is, so I'm not only concerned about, we don't get any purview over discipline, we don't get to see it and whatever. But when I think about what are the potential outcomes of a sustained allegation, it's not only that I'm interested in punitive things, it's also that I'm interested in seeing people's performance improve. And so I feel like part of the value of putting something like de-escalation in there is because I very rarely see people losing their jobs or getting demoted or getting unpaid, suspensions or anything like that, because the usual discipline that I can see that comes out in the aggregate numbers is things like coaching or counseling or, revisit something with a defensive tactics sergeant or something. Since that's often what appears to be what people get, if they're not charged, if de-escalation isn't classified, then it's not as clear to me that that will be something that they get. And I would like people to get all the training possible, the best techniques to develop, like what Jose was saying, that unself-conscious habitual muscle memory kind of type of reaction, to have that level of skill and expertise. It's something that I think should be central to the way that we conceptualize public safety, is important to me. So I was grouchy about de-escalation not being on there. That's all. But Mark, I understand your rationale and I appreciate it.
Well, I'm always looking for,
still grouchy.
I'm still just, I'm not sure I've even found consensus with this group in terms of that. And I'm pretty flexible and things like that. Again, I have that philosophical issue. The other thing is I wanted to clear up for you. There's a border in their disciplinary process from documented counseling, and then the next step is oral reprimand. Once on documented counseling, they cannot grieve that. They cannot take it to an arbitrator or anything else. If they get the higher step of starting with oral reprimand, written reprimand, then suspension, then termination, then they can start to grieve the oral reprimand portion. So just so again, because you don't get to look at the discipline, and honestly, because this turned over, Jason was actually done much sooner, but the chief, with everything that's been going on with the demonstrations and stuff, I know it took a while for him to get to this one, and the budget issues in the city. But so I just want to let you know and let the board know that's where there's a significant shift in the eyes of human resources, the collective bargaining agreement, and the chief. Not that I can't say whether it's impactful on their decisions or not, but that's where there is that border, if you will.
So I see Leah and then I see Bernadette, but Bernadette's on the board, so you get to go first.
So what that brought to mind, Mark, is if what you're saying, what I would believe then is because de-escalation was not charged or was not an allegation here, if the reprimand was something that was grievable, if in the discipline, they were told in the discipline to do something in addition to coaching, but as part of the discipline process, they were told that they also needed to be retrained on de-escalation. Could that be grievable, them saying, I wasn't charged with de-escalation, I was only charged with use of force, so therefore you can only have use of force training and not something with de-escalation? Is that making sense, what I'm asking? That could then be grievable if they were being disciplined high enough?
I don't think I don't think being retrained on something would be considered a disciplinary issue. I think that would be an issue of, okay, obviously this person's not doing well on de-escalation, and therefore we need to retrain them. So it does make sense. And again, I think, I quoted the, more holistically the policy, and within what we quoted as the policy violation included de-escalation, and it was talked about. So it was a violation of the force policy. Could I have extracted specific elements of the force policy out to make 2 instead of 1? I could, but I think it was still wrapped within there. But again, the force used to break the arm, in my opinion, and in the chief's opinion, was disproportionate to the standards of Graham v. Connor.
Okay, so then my other question with regards to de-escalation is, because we see de-escalation as a concern and a need, but not often an allegation because there's something more serious, like in this case, use of force. Statistically, is the auditor catching numbers to be able to say at the end of the year, de-escalation was an issue in 20% of our cases? If it's not being alleged, is the number a false low? Because I would hope that this would be caught in the numbers that de-escalation was an issue. But since it's not an allegation, is it going to be captured in those numbers?
Well, it may not be, and that I kind of want to segue into, for example, what the ordinance defines as serious misconduct. And it includes an egregious use of force. And so that's another issue that I suppose that I wrestle with as well, is I think we've really pushed the boundaries of what we consider to be an allegation of serious misconduct. And so if I've got something beyond that, and don't get me wrong, there's a case pending right now in which the only allegation was the violation of the de-escalation policy, and part of which is because it was, a higher ranking person. But I think that I feel better if I don't have to add it, if there's something that is more in step with the allegation of serious misconduct that the ordinance defines, as opposed to a policy violation. Now, do I wish we had a category between service complaint and allegation of serious misconduct? Yes, I wish we had a category in between, but we don't.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Leah, and Carolyn, did I see your hand? Okay, Leah, go ahead.
I'm just going to say that I don't know if this is something the group wants to discuss, but the language in the de-escalation policy is pretty strong, but it still says should. It's still officers should make every reasonable effort to de-escalate confrontations. And so one thing that I've found is it is simpler in adjudicating things where it says must or similar, because when there's a should, it can sometimes be hard to figure out what that really means. So if that's something that this group wants to take to police commission or to the chief, or I just wanted to raise that as a potential policy issue that you guys might want to take to a different body.
And I think that's real important, Leah. And I think I might have stated before, there is no case law that requires officers to de-escalate a situation if the arrest is considered lawful and the force used is considered reasonable under the totality of the circumstances. So EPD policy is actually stricter than any court case law in the land. And I think, as Leah said, I think it's an opportunity to go back to the police commission and say, okay, what really should our standard be? And should it be a must and a requirement? And should it be worthy of disciplinary action under the following circumstances?
So Mark, can I ask a clarifying question? So are you saying violation of the de-escalation policy is not classifiable as serious misconduct?
It is under the totality of the circumstances, I think, is how we do it. So again, we look at it isolated. We've probably done a few. I know there's one pending, and I hope we take the opportunity to look at that. And I don't know how the adjudications are going to be. It's also wrapped into any of the officer-involved shootings that we might have pending as well. So I think just on a case-by-case basis, but if I have an opportunity to wrap it within use of excessive force, as in this case, then that's how I would classify it.
That makes sense. Thank you. That's helpful for me to understand your thought process there.
And my expectation is also higher for people who are, not a line officer, if you will, or an inexperienced officer. If they're supervisors or people like that, then I do have higher expectations in terms of managing a situation in which there's an opportunity to de-escalate.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else to say about the intake, classification, investigation, or monitoring before we move on to the next section? I'll just say, as usual, the investigation was thorough. The materials are super well organized, clear, well written. So thank you. Makes it easy for us to review everything because it's well done work. Okay, so the next section is EPD, policies, practices, and training. Bernadette, we can start with you.
I have nothing more to add.
Thank you. How are we doing this? Is it Jose and then Carolyn?
Yes.
Likewise, nothing to add.
Carolyn?
More training on de-escalation.
And Rick, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I had one point for sure, and that is that, again, I'd like to bring up the fact that the camera was muted for extended periods of time in at least two of the officers. And I could not see any tactical reason at that point. The subject was in custody at that point. It might be helpful to understand what they're thinking as a body reviewing what they're thinking. And I didn't see any reason to mute it. It may be that it was muted for a long time because they just forgot to turn it back on. I don't know, but it was muted, and I'd like to see some more training on that. And perhaps some training on the appropriate holds to be used. And again, I don't understand how those all work, and I'd be the first one on my back in a karate fight. So it all looked real complicated to me, and I don't know whether it would have made any difference anyway, but perhaps that ought to be considered if we've got a situation where the officer, in the heat of things, didn't have the training enough to react in an appropriate way.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for bringing up muting. That was on mine too. And it wasn't just one officer, it was two of them. So I forgot and left it on for a long time sort of is difficult for me to get to. There was clearly like a hand signal where they both went to mute their microphones simultaneously and left them muted for long periods of time, which makes me grumpy as well. I don't like that. I don't think that's to me, it's just erasing evidence. And it's possible that there are things in there that might need to be redacted later. And then we redact them, but not collecting the evidence really bothers me. I had two other things. So, and one of them was just in the video, there was video included in our packet where an officer went to interview the suspect in the hospital after they were taken there for the broken arm. From what I can tell, I think this was Officer A, one of the involved officers at the scene. So the officer was there when medics were there and had sedated the person to transport them to the hospital. And so the whole scene was troubling to me. First, it was troubling because the suspect clearly had a major fear reaction to the officers being in the room and started yelling and kind of thrashing and is clearly very upset just by their presence. So that was upsetting to watch. But the other thing that I'm curious to know more about, when the officer was reading the suspect their rights, it was not clear that the person understood the rights. The officer knew the person had been sedated. The person was sometimes talking to people who didn't seem to be in the room. And so I was going to kick this to Rick, because I am not a lawyer. I know nothing about the law, to just learn more about the advisability of conducting such an interview and reading someone in such a state their rights, and would anything that comes out of that type of interview be admissible in a court type setting? Those are kind of like my questions that I just don't know the answers to. So if you don't mind, I know there are other lawyers here, so feel free to jump in. We can have a panel discussion, but I would love to hear more.
Yeah, I had some thoughts about that. I actually also, in fact, as I was watching that, I thought to myself, I don't really think he got an answer to whether she understood. And I don't know whether she was capable of understanding at that time. And I think it would be an issue that would be raised in a motion prior to trial if the case went to trial. And the remedy would be striking any evidence that came out of that interview and any evidence that was discovered as a result of the evidence that came out of the interview. So the old fruit of the poisonous tree argument. And I don't, as a practical matter, don't believe it would have changed the outcome of the criminal case, because they had enough evidence really to establish a criminal case by the testimony of the witness if they could ever find him again. Assuming he would. He seemed like a reasonably permanent guy. But I also noted early on, right after the medics arrived, that it appeared that there was a syringe that was used on the patient, or that was a patient at that time. And it could very well have been that that patient received a sedative at that point, or pain medication of some sort. And it didn't appear that the officer gave any consideration to that. He just went ahead and interviewed the witness. And I think there's a risk there that would be not admissible if there was a hearing on it at trial, because the issue is whether the Miranda warning is understood, reasonably understood under the circumstances. And I think a real good argument could be made that it was not.
So in terms of policies, practices, and training, it seems inadvisable to try to compel testimony from someone who doesn't understand their rights, that it would have potential follow-on legal consequences in being not terribly useful, and potentially uncovering information that, because it was the fruit of the poisonous tree, couldn't be used. So I guess my question is, what are the EPD policies regarding interviewing people, particularly in a medical situation where tranquilizers or other sedatives may have been used? I quite honestly, I haven't had time to look this up. I try to do my own homework first, but I'm just throwing it out there. I quite honestly don't know what the policy is, but it gives me grave concern that the officer would forge ahead with the way that they did, given the circumstances. And it made me wonder if that was standard practice, or if that was simply that particular officer's prerogative. Go ahead.
We do have Jason here. He's not video, but he's here if you want to ask.
So Jason, I don't know if you want to answer that question, or if you feel prepared to answer that question. I know it's not it wasn't the center of this case and what we're talking about. So I'd be happy with a delayed response as well. But I would like to know more about whether it's policy or practice of interviewing people in medical situations who may have been sedated, and what the standard kind of practice is.
Sure, the standard practice, what we do, there's no policy that prohibits that. As you can probably imagine, a good percentage of the people that we arrest are under the influence of some form or another. And to wait for them all to be sober and lucid is just not it's not the way we do things. I agree with what Rick said earlier about that would be something for the courts to decide if they understood their Miranda rights or anything like that. But if they're awake enough to respond to your questions, we typically will try to ask them those questions and just document what they say. And then it gets argued out in court later. That's typically the way we do things.
So Rick, I see your hand.
Yeah, my comment would be that that's an issue that really would be resolved between the district attorney's office and the police, because the district attorney is charged with prosecuting that case. And if they end up with a case that's not prosecutable because of the failure of evidence, then I'm guessing that there'd be some conversation to the officer by the district attorney to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But I have to go along with what Jason said, that I think they have to go forward with what they feel like they can get at the time, and you don't know what you're going to ever have an opportunity again to talk to the person. If it's bad evidence, it's bad evidence. That's all there is to it.
And just to clarify a little bit too on the Miranda aspect, if they're not lucid enough to answer, because that's the last part of Miranda is, do you understand your rights? Keeping those in mind, will you talk to me? If they can't answer that, or if they won't acknowledge that they understand their rights, then we don't try to go forward at that point anyway. We consider that just like a request for an attorney.
Right. So in this case, that would be another thing that I think was not done correctly by officers. I think it was pretty clear the person did not understand, and the officer continued to pester the person and ask questions and sort of threaten her that this is the patient, that this is the last opportunity you have to tell your side of the story. And I really think it was pretty clear they didn't understand what was going on. Okay.
As I said, I don't think it would have made any difference in the prosecution, but
I don't either in this case, but as a matter of principle, I sort of wonder. But I can see your point too about if it's bad evidence, it gets chucked out. So that there are other safeguarding processes, even if someone's rights are violated because they don't understand what they're saying. There are other protective processes further on in the judicial system that should protect them. So I do appreciate that clarity. That's helpful. Okay. Does anyone else? Oh, I have one more thing. This case made me wonder for the first time, and maybe it should have occurred to me sooner, about this difference between somebody having a pain response and somebody resisting arrest, and how difficult that might be in some circumstances for officers to differentiate between the two. So this is one of those cases where I found it difficult to really understand how it didn't look like the person was resisting arrest. It looked like the person was in an extraordinary amount of pain. I mean, she like involuntarily urinated and was screaming and yelling. I mean, these are visceral pain responses. And so I guess I was having just kind of a hard time processing that. Like, and are officers trained to recognize the difference between a human pain response and someone who is actively resisting arrest? I guess that's another Jason question.
No, there's no training regarding being able to differentiate why people are doing what they're doing. I would just say it's common sense and experience. I mean, you might adjust the way you're dealing with somebody if you think they're having a pain response versus they're actively resisting, but no, there's no specific training. I can't think of any training that would address that specific concern.
Thank you. Rick, go ahead.
I don't know that it would make any difference in this case because the patient was injured immediately almost. And as a result, the pain was there. They didn't do anything different. Couldn't have done anything different other than to call the medics. So there was an officer there who was treating her quite nicely, I thought, trying to calm her down. And I don't see that they could be subject to any criticism for what they did after she started yelling. One thing I've noticed in many of the cases that we've dealt with in this capacity is that there is an immediate, almost visceral reaction by anybody who's going to be handcuffed, that they start yelling, "Ow," So I'm assuming that the officers can become a little callous to that, and it could come into the picture, but I don't, in this case, I don't think it would have made a difference.
Thank you. Can I ask someone to look through the notes and clarify, because I won't be able to find it. But was this person charged with resisting arrest? Was that one of the things that they were cited for? Because if so, that would sort of trouble me. But the other thing that I will say is I absolutely agree with you, Rick. Particularly the third officer on the scene, I thought was very humane and spoke to the person respectfully, asked questions to try to get the person into a more comfortable position, explained what they were doing before touching the person, which seemed to make a very big difference in her in the suspect's sort of response to what was going on. Those things I think made a really big difference in the experience, a horrible experience for that person. And certainly, I mean, it's horrible enough for me to watch, but I totally agree. Particularly that third officer on the scene did an excellent job of trying to take care of a person who was in a very less than ideal situation. Okay, are there any other comments on the policies, practices, and training before we move on? So, oh, go ahead, Carolyn, I see you.
As far as I can tell, reading the report, it does look like they were charged with resisting arrest. Is that right from what other people saw? Okay.
I don't know if that was followed through at the prosecutor level, but yeah, the arrest report says harassment, open container, and resisting arrest.
Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to adjudication recommendations. Bernadette, if you want to go first, and then Jose.
Yeah, so I've been so good about not saying gender in this entire thing, but my last comment, I'm going to have to talk about gender because the line, almost the nearly last line in the chief's adjudication memo really just kind of, it bothered me. It indicating that the victim was frail and small of stature and did not pose an immediate credible threat to two male officers. I didn't feel there was a need for that word male officers because whether they were male officers or female officers, this person didn't pose a threat. I mean, officers are trained to be able to take control of a situation, and I think it does a disservice to the female officers on the force to somehow indicate that this might have been a credible threat if they were female officers, but clearly wasn't a credible threat because they were male officers. Maybe it's just me, but I didn't like that word.
Thanks, Bernadette. Jose, and then Carolyn.
I agree with Bernadette. Are you specifically asking about our recommendation?
Yeah, so this is just when we talk about the adjudication recommendation. So you can talk about the chief's adjudication, the auditor's adjudication, you know, if you agree or disagree, anything that has to do with that. Or if there's something that you wanted to say earlier and didn't know where to put, you know, we're flexible.
Yeah, I would agree with, it looks like there was agreement across the board here, right? No.
So the chief and the auditor agreed, but the EPD chain of command below the chief did not agree. So what happened was below the chief, the captains, lieutenants, sergeants, that chain of command said that they found this to be within policy. The chief said that it was sustained, and the auditor said it was sustained.
In that case, I agree with the auditor that this should be educated as sustained.
Thank you, Carolyn, and then Rick.
I agree that it should be sustained. And I found another, like Bernadette, I found something that was a bit troubling in one of the adjudications. The captain wrote in their adjudication that they were he said that the concept of de-escalation is good and people need to utilize it. In this case, could have been an opportunity to do so. At the end, he said that at the end of this paragraph, he said, we can speculate and theorize what might have been, but we just won't ever know. I think that's a little bit flippant about this. And I think that we should definitely, we should hold all of our officers to a standard that they de-escalate. And by saying, we don't know what would happen if they had tried something differently, it just feels like it kind of undermines the process here. It's kind of saying like the whole process of looking at these cases, what's the point of it if we'll never know what could have happened differently? It just felt very undermining to me, to the auditor's office, to the process, and to the chief, and to our body. So if that's the kind of attitude that people in the department have, then that's problematic to me. So, but I do agree that it is sustained.
I agree with the chief.
So the chief and auditor agree. So I agree with both of them. That's good. Carolyn and Bernadette, I think you bring up important points. It was useful to see that the chain of command found this to be within policy. I find that troubling, particularly given, I mean, the information presented to them was the same, right? As presented to the chief, as presented to the auditor. The defensive tactics sergeant report I thought was pretty explicit and useful. And so I suppose it gives me pause to think about particularly higher levels of leadership within EPD. Finding that within policy is troubling to me. But I agree with the chief and the auditor in terms of adjudicating it as a sustained violation of use of force. Okay. So at this point, I think we have scheduled a break. Is everybody okay with taking, we can do a 10-minute break is what we were scheduled to do. Is that work for everyone? So if we can come back at 6:55, that would be great. And then we can talk about the next case. So we'll pause. Thank you.
Want to do this one, Leah?
So this will be our second case review of the evening. We'll have a description from the auditor's office, and then we will open it up for CRB discussion. So, auditor's office, take it away.
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted with the email, and now I will do the PowerPoint. One second, everyone. Mark, are you saying you want me to read this, or you want me to do like the case thing?
Well, it's my case. If you want to read it or I'll read it, doesn't matter.
Okay, I say you go for it. We don't.
Sick of me, but
No way.
that's why I was thinking in terms of classification. I think I've done like about 4,000 classifications now. I feel like the Cal Ripken of classifications.
All right.
Ready? Okay.
Ready.
Excuse me. Officer A, B, and C responded to a report of a dispute. After interviewing the alleged victim, which I wasn't really thrilled about that interview, quite honestly, the officer determined that probable cause existed to arrest the suspect who was in an apartment that they and the alleged victim had previously shared. The three officers went up to the apartment. Officer C followed Officer A down the hallway and entered the apartment. Officer A drew their taser and carried it down at the side. Officer B told the suspect they were under arrest. The suspect replied, "Come arrest me, bitch." Officer B and C each grabbed the suspect by the arms. The suspect immediately complained of pain. As soon as Officer C took hold of his arm and attempted to move it, the suspect responded by pushing away and telling the officers twice to stop. The suspect stood up and verbally resisted arrest and did not follow orders to place their hands behind their back. It was difficult to tell how much the suspect was physically resisting, as the movement of everyone was static. Officer A deployed a taser, which was effective, striking the person in the chest, stomach area. I should have included that. The suspect was taken into custody without further incident. Okay. Flip it, please. Thank you. The defensive tactics supervisor was asked to review the incident and provide findings. The defensive tactics supervisor determined that the use of the taser was within policy. The defensive tactics supervisor first explained the defiant behavior of the suspect, then wrote, "I think the use of the taser was quick and other options could have been implemented first, but I don't find the deployment out of policy." The defensive tactics supervisor also stated that neither officer attempted a proper hold lock for two-officer handcuffing. The defensive tactics supervisor also attempted to analyze the area of deployment. In other words, where the taser barbs actually struck the person, but it was not entirely clear because pictures were not taken of where the probes stuck in the suspect's body. The allegation was that Officer A's use of the taser during the arrest of the suspect was in violation of the use of taser policy. And I'll just highlight part one and part two. Well, I'll just highlight part two. A person who, by their words or conduct, the officer reasonably believes creates a credible threat of serious physical injury to the person himself or herself, the officer, or another person. And so the adjudications, again, chain of command, thought that the officer acted within policy. Our recommendation was sustained, meaning the officer violated the taser policy, and the chief's final adjudication was sustained that the officer violated the taser policy. Okay.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Leah. So let's talk generally about the case. I'll give Bernadette a small break and make Rick go first this time. You've rearranged yourselves on my screen, so we're just going to go with that order. So we'll go Rick and then Jose.
I had a couple general comments. First, and that is that A put his hand or his arm in front of the camera on the majority of the interview with the victim. And it was kind of bothersome. I don't know whether that's just to have it look like he just had his arms folded in front of him. But my guess is that ought to be discouraged. My feeling was that A seemed fairly eager to use the taser, and it happened rather quickly without giving anybody the opportunity to do anything else to try and stabilize the guy or the person. I thought B was fairly professional and C was also fairly professional. Other than that, I don't have any comments at this point.
Thanks, Rick. Jose and then Bernadette.
So I think that the issue, as I see it, and I am, of course, always open to reading this case as others see it and learning from them, that it turns on this phrase, credible threat. And as I see it, there is no credible threat for a few reasons. It appears to me, just from watching the video, and this is not like any kind of empirical analysis, that this person appears to be more surly than arresting. I think I've mentioned this before. I have a 4-year-old at home, and the dialogue between this person and the officer sounds like a 4-year-old. Like, yes, this person is drunk, and sometimes people revert to that status when they're drunk. But it looks like a kid arguing with a caregiver. No, I'm talking to you. Like, it's just this over and over again repeated stuff. They're not angry. They're not looking to inflict harm. This person's saying over and over again, you're hurting my hand. Like, why aren't you listening to me? You're hurting my hand. You're hurting my hand. And we might even characterize this person as gaunt, maybe. At some point in the video, you could see the officer's arm almost all the way around this person's bicep, even though this person appears taller than the officers. I also want to bring forward a topic from the last case review that, again, Rick's characterization is uncomfortable, but correct. Because you can have a use of force violation without a fracture, and you can also have an improper use with no fracture. And this to me appears to be the latter of those cases, that this was an improper use, even though there wasn't serious physical harm. So that helps me, that, again, that might be uncomfortable in a later case, but right now it appears to be helpful to me. There were no known weapons, that was documented. I was inspired to calculate, or at least count the from the comments in the last case, I was inspired to look at the length of time between the officer entering the apartment and deploying the taser. I counted 23 seconds. Again, if we look at the context, it doesn't appear that within this context, that appears to be rather fast to develop. It doesn't appear that it should have been implemented in the first place. I mean, there was 3 of them. He was, more attempts could have been made. I think that this is, just to dog ear this for our conversation, again, from the last case review, I think we should, I would hope to start a conversation where with the appropriate people, that I wish it would have read attempts to de-escalate should have been made. I don't know. I think it's kind of difficult to determine what kind of physical resistance, or if there's physical resistance going on here. At some point, one of the interviews says that the officer kicked, one of the officers when interviewed said that the suspect kicked after being tased. I disagree with that characterization that he kicked. So I think it is really disputable as to whether there's a real credible threat of physical injury there. When the officer walked in, the suspect was sitting on a bed. It just, yeah. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose. Bernadette and then Carolyn.
This was one of those times where when you're reading it, you kind of start to get a picture of how you expect the video to be. And then you watch the video and you kind of go, wow, that wasn't kind of what I was expecting. Because it's like the fact that, they put specifically in the report, come arrest me, bitch. We've looked at enough of these and reviewed enough of these that, the tone in which that is said is obviously going to be key. And it was the first thing I thought, okay, well, that's something somebody says right before they want to get in a fight with an officer. And then you watch the video and you see a young, very thin individual sitting very relaxed on a bed, seemingly without a care in the world, and say that, and you just kind of went, okay, that wasn't the tone of somebody that is really wanting to take on, at that point, the 2 officers that were there, with the 3rd one coming in into the door at that point. I think one of the things that struck me is that, again, I always like to know how long officers have worked for the department. And so the officer that the allegation is against has 12 years, and one of the officers is riding with that person. So that person was a field training officer because the person was hired in January of this year, so less than 6 months. And the other one was about a year and a half, I think, or, well, certainly less than 2 years. And so when Officer A was coming down the hallway, or actually going up the stairs, at some point, I think going up the stairs, made a comment like, oh, they went ahead without me. And so to me, that was somewhat problematic in the sense that the field training officer is still down below and their trainee has already gone up above. And so now, in a sense, you've got a new recruit taking their cues from somebody with less than 2 years on the force. And so that, again, it's one of those things that, I think we need them, to be slowing things down, the de-escalation. And so I think that might have factored into the FTO's mind going up there and approaching this, that, what have they already done, sort of thing. I don't know, because that wasn't, part of the questions, but it certainly was something that kind of went through my mind as I was reviewing this and reading this. And yeah, I mean, when Rick said that, it just looked like, was it Rick? Rick, have you talked already? Yeah, you did. Okay. And you said something about, they looked like they were ready to use this taser. I'm losing my mind. I think somebody said that. Did somebody say that? Or did Jose say that? Okay. Anyway, and I don't know if they looked like they were wanting to use it so much as it just, it kind of went pretty quickly once they all three were in the room. And if this is how our new recruits and new officers are learning de-escalation techniques from somebody with 12 years coming in and pretty quickly pulling out the taser, displaying the taser, and using the taser, I think we need to, there's a bigger discussion about de-escalation training than us just saying things need to slow down, which then made me think, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself this is kind of maybe part of the intake classification and complaint, is that if there had been a de-escalation allegation, it would have been against all three of them, because all three of them kind of didn't slow it down. But of course, two of them are kind of taking their cues from the officer with 12 years. So I realize that things are busy, that officers, the idea is like they get there, they want to get the job done and move on to the next call to service, because as a community, people want officers to be ready to respond to their needs. But this one just kind of reminded me of the tasing of the Chinese student, that things just needed to slow down in order to get it right. And I just wish that had happened.
I agree. I mean, all of you have made really good points. I think I have a few ideas, but I want to just continue what Bernadette was saying. And I think that it was not even a problem to de-escalate. I feel like the officers escalated where this person was not escalated when they came in. It wasn't a problem with them needing to de-escalate the suspect. It was a problem of them needing to resist their own urges to wildly escalate a very non-escalated situation. I think the chief put it really well in his adjudication, where he said that this person was statically resisted. It doesn't appear there was any immediate threat to the officers. I think that is a really good distinction to make. I think that there are probably different ways that people can resist arrest, and that's important for officers to be able to kind of suss out what kind of resistance is happening. And a static resistance, I think, would take a very different approach than somebody who's fighting and kicking and screaming. And I think that the officers made a bad call here. as Jose already pointed out, this person was asking for help. They were actively asking for help. And it makes no sense to me why somebody who's asking for help would be perceived as being aggressively resisting arrest when they're really just trying to be helped. Another thing that really bothered me in this case, okay, well, two more things. 23 seconds, Jose, you said, from the first officer entering. I'm pretty sure for the person who deployed the taser, it was only 8 seconds. So that's not a whole lot of time to assess what's going on in this room when you enter it. When they entered, they saw that they had hands on, right? And then they just assumed that we needed to go taser. I think that's how I saw it. I see Bernadette questioning that, but I don't know. The thing that really bothered me, one of them, with this one and also the last one, was the lack of masks that the officers were wearing. They're in somebody's home, and I don't think any of the 3 officers had masks on. They didn't have them on outside, which is excusable, I think, if you can be 6 feet apart. It didn't look like they were, but it's a concern for me when I see officers not following the guidance, and then knowing that I might have to interact with that officer and not knowing where they've been, and it's a concern for me, and I think that it's something that they should be following. Leah, are you raising your hand? I'm done, so go ahead.
Okay, I just, because this has been something that we've definitely got complaints about, so this date sticks out in my mind. I'm 99% sure that Kate Brown's guidance on wearing masks even outside when you can't be 6 feet apart and always when inside went into effect on July 15th, which was after this. I mean, I still was concerned about the lack of masks as well, but the actual governor guidance came a little later. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks for clarifying the timeline. I don't think there's anything that hasn't already been said. I would just underscore my continuing concerns that we've seen several field training officers here in the last few months, and I don't know how you can expect to get different outcomes if you're training in the same ways. So if we hope for de-escalation to be routinized, or for more problem-solving approach to situations to be standard, when the field training officers aren't demonstrating that, that is problematic. I don't know how we get there. Yep, ditto on de-escalation. Yeah, I also counted 23 seconds from the first officer entering the room. The only other thing I'd say, just generally, is that it was an awkward room. It was an awkward indoor space. So officers ran down a narrow hall into a relatively small and what immediately became crowded room. So it was kind of an awkward physical space. So I will just say that 3 officers and the suspect really overwhelmed the small space of the room pretty quickly. So maneuverability probably was somewhat limited, although I agree with everything else that has already been said. So let's move on to complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring. Rick, if you want to go first, and then Jose.
I thought the investigation was very good. I really don't have any comment other than that. I think that the classification was valid.
Thanks, Jose, and then Bernadette.
Yeah, I would like to highlight that in the chief's memorandum on the 3rd page, in the 2nd full paragraph from the bottom, the paragraph that begins notwithstanding, as they were trained, the need to use the taser might have been avoided in this case. And, you know, like the last case that we discussed, I think this is yet more evidence of the need for perhaps different training. I hesitate to say better because I'm not a police officer. I've never had to be in a fight or flight situation like this one. And I just, maybe there's a pattern at least that, I don't know. I feel like that is worth, that specific part of this was worth more discussion in terms of the case.
Carolyn, I see your hand.
Yeah, can I clarify, Jose? I think, are you looking at the lieutenant's adjudication? Yeah.
Yes, I am. It's 7:15. Thank you for clarifying that. PM.
So Bernadette and then Carolyn.
I think I may have already made my comments with regards to complaint, the classification and investigation. I guess maybe there, though I didn't really hear from the auditor's office as to whether there was any concern about the officers, the first two officers that went into the room, because I was in the auditor's memo to the chief, where you were concurring with the sergeant's failure to attempt to de-escalate, whether or not there was any question about investigating, having allegations against the other two officers. I mean, I realize that the problem, that the de-escalation is problematic, but just kind of wonder, or is it because they're so new that we figured training is a better way to go without there needing to be an investigation because of how the policy is written?
I had two perspectives on that. First of all, I thought it was unwise for them to go down that hallway in a non-tactical manner and enter that room in a non-tactical way. That's a good way to get yourself killed without having some sort of tactical plan of how they're going to enter and make sure that the person that they're going to arrest is not armed or is not prepared to strike, if you will. The other thing I think I'm noticing, and it's a good point about the de-escalation, it seems as if, especially in an APA situation, I've noticed cases where the focus is arrest, not tactical or not safety, but arrest. Okay, we got an APA, this person's going to be arrested, period.
Just so Jose knows, APA is an Abuse Prevention Act that requires somebody to be arrested when there is domestic violence alleged and someone is injured.
I didn't know that either.
Important.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Thank you.
There you go.
So, in retrospect, I think that's an important issue on the de-escalation, and I think it's also an important issue. You see a lot of departments trying to make that shift from only focusing on the rest to considering safety, not only for them, but for the other person and their tactical approach when they're going to make an arrest. But I've noticed way too often on, especially the APA cases, that it's just arrest. We're going to arrest that person, and not taking those other matters into consideration.
So if this had not been an APA assault, so a requirement that somebody be arrested in a domestic violent assault situation, if this had just been a straight up assault between two people at an apartment complex, so not the need to arrest somebody, but to further investigate, do you think de-escalation, so am I understanding that you think de-escalation is harder to put into practice when there is a requirement that somebody be arrested? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
My opinion is that culturally, yes.
Okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that de-escalation is a tool that shouldn't be used, because obviously you don't want to escalate the situation to have an unsafe arrest. And maybe that's what officers are thinking, that de-escalation, and of course Jason and Kyle would be better versed at how to properly talk with officers about this, but it would be good for there to be a training part to it, that even though somebody has to be arrested, we want to keep it low key when we arrest them. That's really what de-escalation would mean in a situation like this, is that yes, we have to arrest them, but we don't have to do hands-on right away and pull them out, kicking and screaming and fighting. Or in this case, well, not kicking or screaming much. Right? Okay, never mind. All right,
Yeah.
so I think
I think it, and it's also, I think it's going to be of great value to my predecessors, because again, I don't know where everyone sits in terms of it being, it's like the body-worn cameras, that every time they switch it off, an allegation of misconduct, or is there some other way that needs to be addressed that doesn't rise to the level of an allegation of misconduct? It's the same thing with the de-escalation thing. And again, I'll be the first to admit, I was highly alarmed by their tactical approach to going to that room. And so and I did convey that to the chief. And they were young officers, and my focus was on the so-called experienced officer and the FTO person.
Thank you.
Bernadette, do you want an answer to that question that you were posing? Do you want either Jason or Kyle to comment on the compatibility of de-escalation and effecting an arrest, or do you just want to make a statement? I was unclear.
Oh, I mean, if they had something to say to it, because I think in my mind, they're not incompatible. But then again, I don't know how the training goes down to be able to say, yes, they're not incompatible, but it's kind of a hard distinction to actually train on, is how I'm thinking it might be. But Kyle's got his picture up and is unmuted, so he's going to say something.
Go ahead, Kyle, and then we'll go to you, Carolyn.
Yeah, I'll make it short. I was just going to say that I don't see that they're incompatible. I do feel like the mandatory arrest creates a complicated situation where if things don't go well, we still have fewer options to back off or back out at some point. But they don't become mutually exclusive just because of the requirement that we do make an arrest. And our training and expectation of officers employing de-escalation is the same regardless of whether it's a mandatory arrest situation or not. It's just sometimes we're going to have to do something at some point. And so it becomes more complicated there. Where other cases, we certainly have more leeway in finding somebody later, coming back another day, really evaluating whether or not it's worth it. But they certainly shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Carolyn?
I don't think I have anything to add. Are we still on complaint intake and classification and investigation? Yeah. I think it was well done. And I agree with the classification.
Yeah, I don't have anything new to add myself. So we can move on to EPD policies, practices, and training. So Rick, if you can go first, and then Jose.
I don't have any comment on that.
Jose, and then Bernadette.
I think my last comment was better suited for this section, so I apologize for that, but I stand by it.
Yeah, I think similarly, mine kind of went between the two. It was part of the intake, but then it kind of went into the training. So I don't have anything else to add.
Carolyn?
I think I would just echo what I said a lot with the last case with de-escalation and that kind of training to continue.
Yeah, and that would be my only comment as well. I suppose I'm left with questions about how you take an ideal like de-escalation and turn it into a standard practice. And I guess I'm left also thinking about how do we evaluate success? And so trying to figure out ways to measure success by de-escalation is something that's I'm sort of like perpetually curious about. So I'm just thinking about that. What are ways that we can take this ideal of de-escalation, which sounds like it's something that community in general are in favor of, and that we are noticing seems to be lacking, or I'll speak for myself, that I am seeing situations, these two cases tonight are exemplary, but there are others where there have been many others over the years where not only not de-escalating, but officers escalating to create what end up being much more unsafe situations for both officers and the community. So it's like a perennial problem, I guess is what I'm saying. And so while I do think we've seen some progress over the years, we now have a de-escalation policy. So now how do we take this ideal and operationalize it, and to the sort of more satisfactory level that we would all be sort of happy with? So I don't have answers. It's just questions. I don't know, but I think that's the next step. I think that's what we're reaching for and aspiring for, is regardless of, for myself, regardless of whether we change the de-escalation policy language or even request to change the de-escalation policy language from, you know, should try to must, I think there's clearly room for improvement in the operationalization of it. So that's all. I suppose I am sort of mentally placing that more in the realm of practice as opposed to policy change recommendation at this moment for myself. So adjudication recommendations would be next, and that, let's start with Rick and then Jose.
I agree with the chief on that. I think that there was insufficient evidence of a credible threat of anybody being injured. The three points that are available under the use of the taser in 809.4.1 are: a person by their words or conduct reasonably believes creates an immediate credible threat of physical injury to the person himself or herself, the officer, or another person who fails to comply with the police order to stop his or her threatening behavior. Or a person by their words or conduct the officer reasonably believes creates a credible threat of physical injury to the person himself or herself, the officer, or another person, or a person assaulting or attempting to assault a public safety officer. Even though the guy was resisting, I don't think that really was more of a passive, as the chief said, and I don't think that it was really could be classified an assault. So I really question the use of the taser under the circumstances of whether it complied with policy, and for that reason I agreed with the chief's conclusion.
Thanks, Rick. So Jose and then Bernadette.
I also concur. Yeah.
So I agree with what Rick said. My only concern in reviewing the adjudication memos was the one written by the lieutenant. The very last line saying that this would be discussed with the officers for improvement. Great. But it didn't need the line, much like a post-game review